Being at the topic of non-duality, non-duality being not two, not dual, it's a negation of duality, essentially. So it's important to talk about the thought system in both accounts, both non-duality and 12-step recovery, because in the 12 steps, the problem resides in the mind. The body might become addicted to a substance, but the problem resides in the mind. But there's a very similar problem that arises in the thoughts through what we might call spiritual practice or meditation. And I've really found this in my own experience, that there's a thought or something that arises in experience, be it a thought, a sight, a sound, or something. The brain claims that, and it has an action towards that. Essentially, we take ourselves to be that arising. We identify with that action. So it's like this. The thought arises. It's like this in my experience anyways. A thought comes up. Then there's a sense that there's you being the one who's seeing that thought. Now, right there, that would be duality. A thought and then a seeing of the thought. So that's two. Obviously, we can negate that, but it doesn't sit that easy all the time with the head. Okay, because this idea presents a two-ness. As if there's a thought and then a seeing of the thought. Now, the seeing of the thought is another thought. But this is the thing. If you take that and you go up into your head, it seems like there's two there, But if you go up into the head, you can't think two thoughts at the same time. They can't arise simultaneously. You see? So for there to be a thought and then a seer of that thought, they would have to arise simultaneously. This is what really trips me out. Is that those two thoughts, a thought and then a seeing of the thought, happen in succession in time. So it's one after the other, but it's like seems seemingly instant. There's a thought that comes up, and then there's a seeing of that thought, and then identification as the seer. All of it happens in time, but super, super quick. But if you really look at the head can't think two thoughts at the same time. So then what's happening is that there's a thought that comes up, and then there's the sense of being the one seeing that thought. Now that's another thought. That sense of being the one seeing the thought. That's another thought arising from the same system. Meaning that there's one system here which is playing two characters. It has two faces. So the thought comes up, there's one face, and then I'm seer of that thought. There's the other face. But it's the same character playing both. You're not the character. You see? It's identifying with being the character of these two faces. Because if you're living as that character, you're living as dualistic, as two different things. As the thought and the seer of thought. You're neither of those. But the way they present themselves, it seems like it's in a two-ness, but it's not. It's one mental system happening in succession rapidly. And that's it. You negate both of those. And who am I, from Ramana Maharshi, negates both of those. Because it says the thought comes up. Who's seeing the thought? I. And then both characters, you've seen them now. Thought and the I. So then that same system asks itself, who am I? And the whole thing negates itself. Because it seems like there's two things. Like there's two yous, essentially. There's a thought, and then there's a you seeing the thought. A lot of people in meditation spend how many, 20, 30 years being the seer of thought. And they're not seemingly getting the relief that they're looking for. Because they're still bound to the one system, which is presenting different faces. I'm not this face, but I'm this face. I'm not the alcoholic, but I'm in recovery. It's still dual. It's duality. These are two faces of the one character. In recovery, we call that character self. And reliance on that system has failed us. And there's a solution, and it's to see that the problem arises in the mental and you're not that. That's the beauty, and we have to see that. And it happens in all kinds of ways. Yeah, the eyes see something, like an object, and the head immediately goes, I'm seeing that. Yeah? And then we identify as that I'm. So there's an arising, a happening, and then there's a claiming of that happening by the mind, small m mind or brain, and then we identify as that, and then we're stuck in that duality. That's the bondage of self right there. Because there is no self, there's no thing inside you which you could call a self. Yes, all of this arising is happening as action. It's like Paul Hederman would say selfing. There's a bunch of verbs happening. And it pretty much stops there. There's happening, but there's no doer thereof, you see? So there's see something, there's a claiming of the head to be the seer of that thing. And then we end up identifying as that claiming. But there's not actually a self there. So it's a misidentification. It's wild. When you go up to the head, you can't think two thoughts at once. They can't arise simultaneously. It has to be in succession. And the process is really, really fast from let's say, an everyday standpoint. If you sit down and the mind calms down, you can see those two things arise. You can see a thought, and then you can see the claiming come right after. It's like bang, bang. Yeah. And then there's a habit to grasp on to those. Specifically the second one. It's almost quite easy to see a thought. I feel like everybody has had that experience where they see a thought, and then, I see the thought, yeah. But the second I see the thought is another thought from the same system. And this is what binds us. Because if we're bound to being the seer of the thought, we're still bound to the doership. You're bound to the same system. It's just a different face. But it's the same system. And that bondage gets super uncomfortable. Yeah, because being the seer of thought, it's like when thought comes up, you still feel like you're the thinker, so you can't get free from it. That's really something. So you're neither presentation. You're neither presentation. And I guess that would be the relief right there.